Hello, everybody. My name is Jimmy Smith, and welcome to the Wine with Jimmy YouTube channel. Here about everything on wine education, especially aimed at those of you taking your WSET examinations. Now, this is a series of videos looking at the exam of the WSET Level 2. So I'm going to go through 5 parts of examination questions, typical examination questions. So this will help you understand what kind of level the questions are pitched at, and of course, how to answer those questions. As always, if you have any comments or questions or concerns, you can get in touch with me here at Wine with Jimmy by the comments section below this video on YouTube, or by the social media that you see at the bottom of every slide. So as I mentioned, this is part 1, and this is going to be part 1 of 5 parts. This part will be free content here on the YouTube channel, but parts 2 through to 5, which totals up 40 questions, is only available to those of you who subscribe to the Wine with Jimmy e-learning portal. That's at www.winewithjimmy.com. Okay, let's begin looking at some of these questions. So here we go. So these are multiple choice questions, and in the examination you will have 50 of them. And with these multiple choice questions, there are 4 answers, of which only 1 is the correct answer. So typically it's like this. So here you'll see Sancerre typically has aromas of. So you are required to know some fundamental things around Sancerre. So the key thing here, and which I'll scribble down for you, is that you must know that Sancerre is Sauvignon Blanc. Okay, so if it is Sauvignon Blanc, then we are looking for typical characteristics of this major grape variety. So let me help you by eliminating certain things to begin with. And looking at the first one, it has flavor aromas of vanilla and toast. These are typically aromas that are associated with oak, and it is exceptionally rare for Sauvignon Blanc to be oaked. So we can immediately get rid of answer A just here. Now, tropical fruit, honey, and ginger. Now, these are characteristics which are often in quite aromatic wines, which Sauvignon Blanc is. So that one could be a possibility. Then we have grass, asparagus, and citrus fruit. Another one that is in aromatic wine, so that's possible as well. And then finally, rose, figs, and stewed fruits. Now, these compounds are often with, well, this could be with red wines, for example, more typically. Certainly, you might find this in things like Nebbiolo or Primitivo, for example. So we're going to get rid of that answer as well. So you're left with these 2. Now, it is really important for you to understand that Sauvignon Blanc typically has very herbaceous characters. And in herbaceous, we have things such as grass, as nettles, things like asparagus and green bell pepper. So, of course, we get rid of answer B here, and we're left with the answer C. So, yep, your answer there is C, and there we go. Grass, asparagus, and citrus fruit. The citrus fruit element as well is because Sancerre typically has very high acidity, and that delivers this citric fruit characteristic. Interesting. So something a little bit more challenging. So this is Recioto di Soave is typically A. So we need to understand what it is out of this lineup. Now, immediately we have the word Soave just here. Okay, and Soave is known as a fairly common, typical northern Italian white wine, making very fresh wines. And a lot of typical Soave DOC, is light, often quite neutral and quite fresh. But then there are Classico Soaves that tend to be a little bit more complex. And then there's this one, Recioto di Soave. And the name Recioto actually stems from an old Roman word. And I'll get to that in a second. So look at your answers here. High volume, inexpensive, fruity white wine. Now that actually would be a description. That's A, would be a description for generic Soave, typical Soave. The one that you've got is not a generic Soave. So we're going to get rid of that one. So that's a bit of a tough question, certainly if you're not sure what Recioto di Soave is. the next ones, I'm going to jump to C because it says high volume again, inexpensive rosé wine. Well, Soave is white wine production, so this is incorrect. And of course, we can get rid of high volume, inexpensive fruity red as well. That is actually typically around Soave, that is Valpolicella. So you're left with high quality, expensive, sweet white wine. And the Recioto de Soave is made by drying the grapes, concentrating the grape sugars to make a sweeter wine. So it's the sweet version of Soave there. So our answer, as you can see, is B, high quality, expensive, sweet white wine. So a bit more of a trickier question in that one. Now, something around the world of the growing environment. And these types of questions are also quite common that you can find in multiple choice. So it's not a typical statement and then picking an answer. It's actually picking a combination. And this looks on the outset a little bit more complex, but because of the combinations in play, it's actually easier to figure out the answer. Just requires a bit of working out. So spring frosts, really obviously a major issue for viticulture, for growing grapes, and of course occurring at springtime when the vine is just starting to open up. So here you can see damage vine shoots. Okay, so that's when the vine is shooting out of its dormant season during winter. So this of course is going to be correct. So I'll put a little green mark against that one. Now if it damages vine shoots and the buds also with vines, that will end up decreasing the yield, so the amount that you get from the vineyard, because there's been damage to the vine. So that's going to be correct. It's not going to be having anything to do with increasing ripeness, because this will happen towards the end of the season. Ripeness happens really from veraison, which is color change, all the way up to when the grapes are picked. So we're not including that one. So our answer here is 1 and 2 only, because we've picked it just here. So 1 and 2 only at the bottom of the screen. Okay, great. So that's another question, that one on viticulture. Now, here is a sparkling question. Cava sparkling wines are produced. Now, there are 4 methods here. Now, we have forced carbonation, which is where carbon dioxide is injected into a wine to create the sparkle. The Asti method, of course, is going to be utilized for Asti. The tank method, of which Asti is a variation of, and then the traditional method. Now, a lot of students, we can immediately get rid of things like forced carbonation because Cava is a quality product from Spain. We can get rid of course, the Asti method because this is Cava. So we're left with these 2 answers at the bottom. So we've got tank method and traditional method. Now, a lot of students, if they are not sure on this question, will look at what they believe Cava is in terms of a price point. And generally, it's quite affordable if you compare it against things like champagne. So a lot of Cava is sold at maybe £10 here in the United Kingdom per bottle. So that's why they might select the tank method. However, the answer here, in fact, is at the bottom. It is the traditional method. It is made exactly the same way as champagne, for example. So it is the Spanish equivalent, major equivalent, really, of the champagne method in Catalonia. It's just that there are generally higher yields and there's more consistent climate, which means the price point tends to be a little bit lower. There's a number of other factors as well, but it's outside of the level 2 pay grade. Well done. So which one of the following sets of flavor characteristics is associated with Merlot? So Merlot, you'll need to understand, is a red grape variety, so a black grape variety that produces, of course, mainly red wines. So we're going to be looking at only answers which typically include flavor characteristics which will come from red wine. So we can immediately get rid of this one here, as mango, butter and vanilla would typically be found in white wines, generally quite ripe and warm climate white wines. Apple, lime and peach, maybe a descriptor there for Riesling, is a white wine. So we're left here with plum, vanilla, toast, and then strawberry, mushroom and meat. Now, Merlot typically is quite a ripe style, so you'll normally find it having quite nice, rich characteristics. So here you'll see that the answer at the top is a plumminess, vanilla, because often oak is used within Merlot, and toast characteristics too, due to the fact of that oak interaction with Merlot, certainly with New World Merlot anyhow. Okay, so that's answer A. Now we have a geographical question, which you also do find a fair bit in the WSET. Now, I'm sorry, if you're not geographically minded, you might have to apply yourself a little bit more, because the world of wine is very much geographical. So Walker Bay. Walker Bay is an important region. Where or for what styles, as it says here? So in California. Okay, for fortified wines, for Pinot and Chardonnay, or in Australia? Well, Walker Bay, if you're not too sure, it could be really anywhere in a New World zone, because of course it's got English connotation to it. So it could be somewhere like the US, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia. Well, we can tell you that it's definitely not in California. So we do not have Walker Bay there. It's also not in Australia. So we're actually not looking purely at geography here. We're looking at styles. And really, for you guys, fortified wines are only really ports and sherries. So we're not really looking at fortified wines. So we're left with the answer here of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And Walker Bay is, in fact, one of the most southerly points of the Western Cape in South Africa. So this is below Stellenbosch, and it's heading towards Hermanus. And then if you were to catch a boat from that point and head south, you head towards the Antarctica. So therefore, there's a very cold current that comes up from Antarctica, hits this very southerly point of the Western Cape, and produces colder conditions. And both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, you should understand, are better in colder conditions, cold or moderate conditions mainly. So the answer here is C. Now we have another question which has a link to what the style is of this wine. So a wine labeled as Tokaji Aszú is what? So Tokaji is a place in Hungary, actually found in the volcanic areas in the northeast of Hungary. And Aszú means noble rot. It is the Hungarian name for noble rot within Tokaji. So therefore, noble rot or Botrytis is what creates a concentration of grape sugars and therefore much, much more sweetness. So the answer here is going to be sweet. Tokaji Aszú is a sweet wine. Okay, just be careful, because if it did say just Tokaji, then the answer wouldn't necessarily be sweet. It is the word here Aszú, which means from nobly rotted grapes, which means it's going to be a sweet style. And apologies about my Hungarian pronunciation. It is not, of course, anywhere near it should be. Very difficult language to muster. So what impact does lees contact have on a wine? So first of all, it is important to understand what lees actually is or are. So let's do a little arrow just here. Here we go. So lees, I'll actually do this in blue so it suits the slides. There we go. So lees are the sediment of dead yeast cells. And we'll put a bit more here, left behind after fermentation. Okay, so we've understood what lees exactly is there. So now we need to know exactly what that can do to a wine if the wine is actually kept in contact with those dead yeast cells. Okay, now they're not going to have any effect really on sugar levels. So it's not going to lower the sugar levels. So lees, when yeast is active and when it is fermenting, it actually does decrease the sugar levels and increases alcohol, but that's during fermentation. And we don't call it lees at that point, it's active yeast. So that's slightly trickier, but we're actually going to get rid of that one, and therefore we can get rid of raising alcohol, because that will all be done with the actual yeast, but the yeast at this time has died and formed the sediment called the lees. It raises the acidity, is point C there. Well, it's not going to have any major impact on the acidity, so it's not going to do that, but there is texture found within dead yeast cells, and that is released into the contact of the wine. So therefore, your answer here is B. It increases body. So if wines have lees contact after being made, so this might be 6 months after being made, 12 months, even longer, then they will gain in more texture and more body. Okay, so for example, when you're talking about the body on the tasting, you might be putting more medium or even full due to these conditions. Old vine Zinfandel has flavors of. So Zinfandel is an important grape variety within California. It is also known as Primitivo in Italy. Now, old vine means, of course, you've got older vines in the vineyard, often 30, 40, 50 years old, and they tend to produce very good concentrated fruit as a result. So you're looking at quite concentrated characteristics. Now, we need to know that Zinfandel, old vine Zinfandel, will make red wines. There is another one called white Zinfandel, which makes rosés, but old vine Zinfandel will make red concentrated wines. So we can immediately get rid of B because that is a description for a white wine. We can get rid of C because that's also a description for white wine. So you are now left with these two. Answer D, raspberry, cherry, and bitter almond will often be for very light and delicate wines, not necessarily old vine fruit. So we're left here, of course, with answer A, which is blackberry, prune, and coffee. And the prune characteristic is often because producers here in California will actually dry the grapes on the vine a little bit longer. And that's because Zinfandel has uneven ripening across its grapes. So that's quite typical to get prune or raisin or something along those lines. And our final question here to get you prepped up for your examination. Flor is needed to make. So we need to understand what flor is and where we find it. That really will help us with this. So flor is a natural yeast layer that forms on top of wine in maturation in the region of Andalusia, making sherry. Okay, so let's just write that down. Here we go, do a little arrow here. There we go. Let's get a text box in here. So flor is a yeast layer forming on top of wines in maturation in sherry. Okay, so this is going to really help us in terms of our answer just here, because we can get rid of Moscato d'Asti, which is in fact a lightly sparkling and sweet wine from northern Italy. We can get rid of Tawny Port, which is an oxidated aged port from Portugal. We can get rid of our sweet wine, Tokaji, that we talked about earlier. So we therefore have Amontillado sherry as being our answer. Now, some of you may notice that and know that in fact Fino and Manzanilla are more famous for flor, but Amontillado will also have some flor as well. It is needed. Amontillados are made partly from flor and partly not, and this is quite a classic style within sherry. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion of this first set of questions. Just to recap that this is part 1 of 5. So these questions were free and are available here on YouTube. Parts 2 to 5, of which there are 40 questions, are only available on the Wine with Jimmy e-learning portal. Please visit www.winewithjimmy.com for more information on how to access that information. Great. So thank you so much for your time and attention. I do hope you found this useful. If you have any comments, questions or concerns, you can pop them in the comments section below this video or get in touch via social media you see at the bottom of every slide. Until then, if you do find yourself in London, then come and see me. You know, I've got a wine school and a wine bar, so you can come and see us for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Goodbye.